Hi, everybody. Thank you very much. Always appreciate you. I'm Orlando Ruiz Jr. Welcome to my top 10 Al Pacino movies. It's been a while since I've done a list on this channel. And I thought, gotta shake it up, mix it up a little bit. So here I am with this list. I'm a big fan of Al Pacino. I love his work. As a movie fan, whenever I think about my top 10 favorite actors of all time, or who I consider to be in the top 10 greatest actors of all time, thinking about a list like that, it's hard not to think of Al Pacino when thinking about great actors. The guy is easily very high up there on the list, and because of his great body of work, all the classics that he was in, and all the great performances that he's given throughout the decades, you cannot deny this man a high spot on the list of the greatest actors of all time, which is why I got to talk about this guy's movies. And I'm going to start off with my number 10 Al Pacino film, Donnie Brasco from 1997. This is a movie that I saw in theaters back in the day. It must have been about maybe 13 or 14 years old. Donnie Brasco is a very highly underrated mob movie based on a true story about undercover FBI agent Joe Pistone, played by Johnny Depp, who makes a contact with Lefty, played by Al Pacino, in a very kind of understated performance for Pacino. He's an aging gangster that is passed over, and so you get to see a different side of Pacino in this movie. Once Johnny Depp's character Joe Pistone goes undercover under the name of Donnie Brasco to infiltrate the mafia and becomes friends with Al Pacino's character Lefty, you really do feel like these guys are buddies throughout the movie, and because of that, Depp's character gets in too deep, and there's a bit of uncertainty where his loyalties lie. It starts to mess with his head. Because of the nature of the story with this undercover agent infiltrating the mafia, there was always this element of danger with Johnny Depp's character all throughout the film, and the movie is very good at playing up the paranoia of the situation. This is a very well directed film from the director of Four Weddings and a Funeral, Mike Noel. Who would have thought that such a good romantic comedy director could make a movie like this? But he did, and it's great and very underrated. So if you haven't seen it, check it out. 1997's Donnie Brasco. It is my number 10 on the list. Yes, indeedy. At number 9 on my list of my top 10 Al Pacino movies, I have 1979's and Justice for All from director Norman Jewison, who directed some of my favorite films, movies like The Hurricane, and he also directed In the Heat of the Night, which is one of the greatest films of all time. In this brilliant film, Al Pacino plays the character of Arthur Kirkland, a defense attorney that actually cares about the clients that he defends. At the very beginning of the film, we see that he is an idealist and he's trying to help out this guy who is arrested for mistaken identity, basically for murder. And he's a young guy, and so you can see that Pacino's character really feels for his situation. There are a lot of good actors in this movie. You got Christine Lottie in there. You also got Jeffrey Tambor. You got Jack Warden from 12 Angry Men and Problem Child. Everybody remember him as Big Ben in that one. And yeah, Jack Warden plays a judge friend of Pacino's character that is a bit on the suicidal side. There's also this real jerk of a judge played by actor John Forsythe who is kind of at odds with Pacino every now and then throughout the movie. At the very beginning of the movie, we kind of get a sense that these guys don't like each other, and Pacino and this judge, they're kind of rivals basically. And in the third act of the film, surprise, surprise, this judge does something. Don't want to spoil it, you haven't seen it, but he ends up having to have Pacino's character defend him in the third act, and it gets very, very interesting, especially in the final moments of the film, which have some of the most iconic Pacino moments in any movie, with Pacino screaming, "You're out of order! You're out of order! This whole trial is out of order!" He gets dragged out of court. It's one of my chair is twisting around. A lot of people aren't really into courtroom dramas because it's easy to think of them as boring, and I can see that. And there are some courtroom dramas that are kind of snooze fests, but this is one of those movies that's very well written, very well directed, and of course it's Al Pacino, and so even if you're not really into courtroom dramas, give this one a watch and check it out. Give it a chance. You might just be surprised on how awesome this movie is. Number 8 of my top 10 Al Pacino movies is a movie that I've already talked about and reviewed on this channel, but because it is on my list, I do want to touch on it a little bit, and so here it is, 1992's Scent of a Woman from director Martin Brest, who gave us Midnight Run and the original Beverly Hills Cop. This is the story of Lieutenant Colonel Frank Slade, who needs to hire an aide to get him into New York City through the weekend, Thanksgiving weekend, for a tour of pleasures, as he calls it. And you got Chris O'Donnell as this college kid who just wants to earn some money to get home for the holidays, and Al Pacino, an Academy Award winning performance and one of the greatest roles that he's ever played. This is one of those movies that I watched all throughout the 90s. Because of Al Pacino's performance in this movie, for me, this is one of the most rewatchable dramas. Not only is it kind of serious at times, but it also has very heartwarming moments and also can be very funny at times, especially with Pacino really turning on the charm when it comes to the ladies. And It's not called Son of a Woman for nothing. This guy has quite a smeller on him. The character that Pacino plays in this movie is very charming, also very disarming, and there is a point in the film where he takes kind of a dark turn and gets very, very deep at times. I remember a lot of my friends back in the day would skip this movie and just avoid this movie because Pacino wasn't a mob guy in this and it wasn't a mob movie, but give this one a chance. Seriously, yeah, he's not playing a mobster, but it's Al Pacino, and he's freaking amazing, and it's a very good story. And yeah, if you haven't seen this one, please check it out. This is one of the greatest '90s dramas, dramedies, or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, it's terrific. Check it out. Number 7 of my top 10 Al Pacino movies is a movie from director Sidney Lumet, who has directed some of my favorite movies like 1957's 12 Angry Men, which is one of my favorite films of all time, as well as another film that I'm going to be getting to pretty soon because it's also on this list. But right now I am talking about 1973's Serpico, based on a true story, another one where you have Al Pacino playing a guy named Frank Serpico who joins the police force. At the very beginning of the movie, we see kind of like something that happens towards the end of the story, but the movie goes into flashback mode to see how he gets to that point where we see him joining the force and having to deal with all kinds of corruption in the police force. Throughout the movie, Pacino plays a very admirable character. He's a guy that stays true to himself, doesn't let other cops influence him, and all throughout, all these cops are trying to get him to take a bribe here and there, and because he's constantly kind of refusing that kind of thing, every now and then you got more and more cops that start to look down on him, and eventually, just like in Donnie Brasco, how it gets a little bit tense with the whole being undercover situation, it almost feels like Frank Serpico himself is undercover as like a good cop amongst all these shady cops, and that is where you have an element of danger with him just being on the force, much like with Donnie Brasco in the Mafia. It's almost like the cops are like a mafia in this movie. We see the effects of how being a cop affects his personal life, his love life, his friendships with people, and it's very, very interesting to see that side that you don't see in a lot of cop movies. As a matter of fact, this movie doesn't just work as a cop movie, but overall a character study, a biopic, and an overall really great drama. There is a bit of action in there as well, so even though it is a drama, at times you can also think of it as like an action cop movie, more on the serious side, of course, since it's based on a true story. But yeah, this is an all-time great for me. This is one of my favorite movies of the 1970s, and this is one of my favorite Al Pacino films, which is why it makes my number 7 spot. 1973's Serpico is a movie that you have not seen. Check it out, especially if you're a fan of Pacino. Number 6 of my top 10 Al Pacino movies is a movie that I've talked about on my channel already, I believe, in its own review, like I already did with Serpico, I believe, as well. But yeah, this is also from director Sidney Lumet, as I already mentioned before. 1975's Dog Day Afternoon. In this movie, Al Pacino plays the very memorable but very desperate character called Sonny, who is joined by his Godfather 2 co-star John Cazale in the role of Sal. And Sal and Sonny at the very beginning of the film attempt to rob a bank in New York City. And everything goes completely wrong for these guys. And throughout the movie, you do see a human side to the bank robbers, and a lot of comedy comes through the situations that feels very of the moment. There have been a lot of bank robbery movies and a lot of heist movies, but because this movie recreates events that happened just a few years prior to the release of this film, and because of the direction of this film from Sidney Lumet, because of the screenwriting and the dialogue and the acting from all the main actors, but not just the stars, even like all the supporting actors, like Charles Durning as the cop negotiating with Sonny from outside, and you also got um, I believe Chris Sarandon in here in a small part. Everybody does such a good job, and the whole movie feels so realistic to the point where you feel like you're watching almost a documentary at times with the way the movie was shot. And I gotta say, this movie is cut beautifully. The editing is impeccable. There are moments in the film that are very, very tense, but also some moments of levity throughout the proceedings. And this is just a very, very entertaining movie based on something that really happened. Of course, there's a lot more to the story in terms of the Sonny character and his motivation of why he is robbing the bank in the first place, which I don't want to give away if you haven't seen this, but if you have not checked this out yet, Dog Day Afternoon is one of the greatest films of the 1970s and one of Al Pacino's best performances. If you have not seen this, please check this out. You owe it to yourself, especially if you are a fan of Pacino's work. I'll show you the cover one more time. 1975's Dog Day Afternoon is a true classic and my number 6 on the list. And at number 5 of my top 10 Al Pacino movies is one of my favorite gangster movies of the 1990s from director Brian De Palma. Carlito's Way came out in 1993. I remember seeing this movie when I was about 8 or 9 years old in the theater. I think I was 9 with my dad and my sister, and I remember having a blast watching it. You also got Sean Penn in this, who is really, really awesome in this movie. Penelope Ann Miller. And Carlito is basically this guy that gets out of prison after he was sentenced to like 30 years, but he gets out in 5 with good behavior and with a damn good lawyer. And so he gets back out on the street and he just wants to live a legit life. You know, he doesn't want to go back to the old ways of being a gangster and all that. He just wants out. But much like in Godfather 3, what's that famous line? You know, what he says, oh yeah, just when I thought it was out, they pulled me back in. That's kind of what goes on in this movie. Something else that I personally appreciate about this movie is I see a lot of gangster movies about Italian gangsters or Irish gangsters, but you don't really get enough gangster movies when it comes to like Latin gangsters. So this movie centers around Puerto Rican gangsters in the 70s. So you got Al Pacino playing Puerto Rican, which is a lot of fun to watch. And just the Latin angle gives this a kind of different flavor that separates it from everything else that's came before it or since. Carlito's Way is definitely one of Pacino's unsung great films that doesn't get enough praise. It is one of those movies that every time I rewatch it, I'm so happy to have gone through the experience of watching it because the filmmaking in this movie is a joy to watch. The way De Palma works with the camera and just the way he plays with suspense and with our emotions and just has you hanging on pins and needles at certain scenes. I remember seeing this in the theater feeling like I'd just been blown away by the cinematography and the acting and the music and just the entire package was something that I could not stop thinking about long after watching this movie. Yeah, I was only like 9 years old, but you know, I knew my Pacino, I knew my Brian De Palma, I knew these guys had collaborated 10 years prior on Scarface because even at 9, Scarface was a movie that I had seen by then, and so I knew about the history about these guys, and just seeing them team up again 10 years after Scarface to have this little reunion of working on another gangster movie was so exciting in '93. And yeah, you know, if you haven't checked this one out, I do highly recommend it, obviously. And so, yeah, Carlito's Way from 1993. From here on out, the rest of the movies on this list are films that I've already talked about in their own movie review videos. So if you want to check those out in my playlist, you should be able to find them. But my number 4 on my top 10 Al Pacino movies is from 1995 from director Michael Mann, and it also stars Robert De Niro. Yep, I'm talking about Heat. One fucking masterpiece of a movie. You got Al Pacino playing Vincent Hanna, Detective Vincent Hanna, excuse me, going up against Neil McCauley, that is Robert De Niro's character. I don't think I can stress enough to you all the level of excitement and anticipation among movie fans upon this movie's release back in 1995 because of the careers of both of these guys, De Niro and Pacino. First time together going head to head in a movie. They had been in a movie together in Godfather Part 2, but they never had a scene together, and so the trailers of this movie really played up that angle of these two acting legends, these two titans of the screen, actually sharing the screen and going up against each other as a cop and a bad guy. Yeah, it's a long one. Yeah, it's like 3 hours, but it is a saga. It is a well made, beautifully written crime saga with these two guys that are as good as each other. Basically, it's just one guy is, you know, on the light side, another guy in the dark side. And Val Kilmer is awesome in this as well. You got Tom Sizemore in there, Ashley Judd. What's this guy's name? Shit. I know his name, just can't blank. Ted Levine. Ted Levine, that's him. John Voight, Hank Azaria. You got Tone Loc in there. Check out Heat if you haven't seen it. Not mistaking it for The Heat, the Sandra Bullock movie. So, yeah, there you go. That's my number 4. In at number 3 on the list, yes, another Brian De Palma classic from 1983. Say hello to my little friend. Sorry, I'm not very good at Al Pacino, but yes, you know Scarface was going to be on this list, and you got Tony Montana, played by Pacino, this guy that comes from Cuba on the boat. No banana boat. 1983 Scarface is a remake of a 1932 Howard Hawks black and white gangster classic starring Paul Muni in the role of Tony Camonte, which the 83 movie changes to Tony Montana for Al Pacino since they changed it from Italian to Cuban. You also have the great Michelle Pfeiffer in this movie, who was very, very young at the time. I believe that this was right after she was in Grease 2. In this movie, she plays the role of Elvira, the trophy wife, so to speak, to the Al Pacino, Tony Montana character. You also have Robert Loggia in there, who is great. He was in Big, did the dancing on the piano scene with Tom Hanks, and you also have Mary Elizabeth Master Antonio in here. Like a lot of great films, this is a long one. This is about 3 hours long, but not a moment is wasted in this movie. Every scene in this movie counts. It is a great story. You have a rise to power of this like nobody thug that kind of just punks his way to the top and ends up paying the price for basically being a dick to everybody. So lesson there for people that are dicks to people. And so yeah, don't be a bad guy. Be a nice guy. For people that aren't really into violent movies, I don't recommend it because there is some extreme violence at times, but considering how movies have evolved through the years, some might find the violence in this kind of tame by now, but for its time, for 1983, there are scenes in this movie that are on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre level for some people. And if you've seen the movie, then you know exactly the scene I'm talking about. But yeah, this is one of those movies that is one of those great 80s classics. If you haven't seen it, you owe it to yourself to give it a watch. It is a great time and one of my favorite Al Pacino films and one of my favorite films of all time, period. Number 2 of my top 10 Al Pacino movies of all time from 1974 from writer Mario Puzo and director Francis Ford Coppola is the masterpiece The Godfather Part 2. Like its predecessor, The Godfather Part 2 is a cinematic masterpiece, and it's not very often where you have an original film come out and blow everybody away like The Godfather did, and then you have a sequel that comes out, which, when you have a movie on Godfather level greatness, usually something like that isn't gonna be able to live up to the original, but somehow they did it. Because this movie had the same director and the same writer and uses all the same actors pretty much, it very much feels like an extension of that first film. And it picks up 7 years after the events of the original, with Michael moving the family to Lake Tahoe. So now they're not in New York anymore, and the business is a little different. After you get to know Marlon Brando's character of Vito Corleone in the first film, it's so much fun to see another actor have a stab at that part. And in the second film, you get to see a very young Robert De Niro playing a very young Vito Corleone. So it's just cool to see that Robert De Niro take on the character, and it's also a lot of fun. But the thing about this movie is really kind of the descent into darkness and madness of the Michael Corleone character, because in that first film, he starts out that kid that didn't want anything to do with his father's business, and to see the contrast of that by the end of The Godfather Part 2, it is amazing. This is one of those stories that it's going to live on forever because these films are timeless classics, and the way that they're shot and the way that the acting still holds up, because you got top tier acting from everybody involved, and just the way the story kind of unfolds beautifully all throughout. These are movies that are going to live on forever, and people are going to be watching these movies till the end of time. If you love movies, and if you know you're watching a great movie, you don't want that movie to end. And that's kind of the case with some of the greatest movies of all time, like The Godfather Part 2, where this is a movie with a long run time because it's about 3.5 hours long. And so it's a bit longer than the original. But of course, there can only be one number one on this list. So here it is, my number one of my top 10 Al Pacino movies of all time. 1972's the original The Godfather from director Francis Ford Coppola, written by Mario Puzo. One of the greatest films ever. Marlon Brando as Don Vito Corleone is cinema gold, and whenever I watch this movie, it's really hard to take my eyes off him when he's on the screen because he is mesmerizing to watch in this part. Then you throw in the great Al Pacino as his youngest son, Michael Corleone. You also have John Cazale as Fredo, the middle son, who's kind of the weaker of the three, and you have the tougher, kind of hothead son, played by James Caan as Sonny, who is a real kind of hot-tempered guy that wants to really kind of take charge, but his dad is pretty much running the show for the time being until things get kind of crazy, and then somebody has to step up, and it gets very, very intense. But it is a sweeping story, a great music score. Al Pacino really rises to the occasion in this movie and really shows the world what a tremendous actor he was going to be. Yes, this movie is a mob movie, and yes, it is a crime movie, and yes, there is some violence in it, but the violence really doesn't overtake the story. The violence is in there in a way to kind of help tell the story, but overall, it is the story of a family and their relationships and their dynamic and the power struggle. And I know that some people might prefer The Godfather Part 2, but personally for me, I really love the character arc of the Michael Corleone character in this film, which is what really kind of takes it up a few notches for me personally. That was my top 10 Al Pacino movies of all time. Thank you very much for watching this top 10 list video. I very much appreciate it, and please look out for my next classic movie review. Anybody that watched this video all the way till the end, thank you very much. I very much appreciate you. Please take care of yourselves, take care of each other. Have a good one, and I'll see you on the next one. God bless, be safe, take care, bye-bye.